Second here.
This is in Zion National Park. And this is the Virgin River Narrows. And the river has cut its way through the middle of the park in this deep, deep, deep canyon. And the canyon walls are like, in some places, they're like 6 feet apart from each other. Here, they're about 20 or so. These canyon walls are maybe a couple 100 feet tall. And the rock is typically red sandstone. You get way down in the bottom of the canyons and it's very dark and black and everything, but you see where the sunlight comes through. This image right here, this process I went through here was I used black ink first.
Yeah.
And I put black ink on the right side wall, the left side wall, and the water to build up the contrast to get the darks dark. And then I put purple on the two side walls of the canyon. Doesn't show up that well in the photo. It shows up better in the actual print. Then I used blue with a little black in it on the water to get this kind of bluish, grayish colored water. And then I used yellow, orange, red, and red violet and purple on the areas up in between the crack here in the background or in the foreground here. And then just smooth it all out in between to get this even transition in the colors. And Austin, you were asking, well, is that hard to do? And no, it's really easy, because all you really need to do is take your sponges and just tap back and forth and just blend all the colors together. So,
so Dan, let's take a quick step back here with the basics. What I would love to know is like time of day, camera, film.
I was there in August. This was about 20 years ago. It was about 100 degrees out, and this photo would have been taken about noontime. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This was a 4x5 color transparency, so it's on Ektachrome or Kodachrome. I took some black and whites through the canyons as well, and I've done some work with those, but this one I liked, and I have a similar version of it hanging on the wall in my house here. Austin, you want to bring up the other photo, which is, you'll see that these colors you see here, how close they are to actual real colors.
Oh, sorry, I didn't save that one.
That's okay. I can bring it up if I can find it here. Because the average observer might look at this and say, well, those colors aren't real, are they? And hang on here.
I'll make it so that you can share.
Let's see if I can find this here. It should be this one. Oops, that's the wrong one. Share my screen.
What size is the final image done?
The paper is 11 by 14, so this image is a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
So can you guys see this now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, excuse the reflections on here, because there's glass in front of this one, but this was taken a couple of 100 yards further down the river or up the river, one direction or the other. So these are the actual colors from a color photograph from the original color transparency. So it's a really interesting place, and you guys over in Europe don't have a chance to really go there, but Austin's going to be there in May, so he'll have a chance to see it. So Austin, the good thing about going in August is the water level is fairly low in the river, and you just walk your way up the river. I never got in water deeper than my knees, hardly. And
Nice.
this is about a mile or so up from where the road ends in the park, and you just get out and start walking up the river. And
yeah, I think going there in May, all the runoff is going to be pretty intense.
I don't know what it's going to be like. I also wonder how cold the water is going to be.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty cool place, the Virgin River is. So I'm going to stop sharing. You can go back to my
Okay.
image then.
Yeah, let me pull this back up. So you shot it 4x5 on a slide film, is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
And then what was your conversion process with that slide 4x5 into.
This is actually from one of the black and white negatives that I took.
Oh, okay.
So I showed you the color one so you can see exactly what the colors look like. And I took the black and white negative and made the liquid emulsion print from that. That's why the two slides are a little bit different. Two images are a little bit different because they were in a different spot. But and my intent was to try to fairly closely match the colors to the real slide in the image here. And
Gotcha. And is this on hand coated emulsion, or is this?
Yeah, this is foam emulsion on Arches platine paper. So there's an interesting couple of things that I've learned about doing the liquid emulsion with the sponges, and they're kind of contrary to each other. And that is that the wetter the paper it is, the easier it is to spread the ink around and to pull out the detail that you see in the rock wall on the right side. So I go through multiple soakings and multiple coating processes to do this. This was about 5 steps to do this, but to get the detail out and to pull the contrast out, what I'll do is put the ink on the paper first. It takes maybe 20 minutes to go over an image this size. Then I'll soak it in the water, pull it out, dry it off, and then I'll take my little sponge here and turn it on the edge, the flat edge like this. And this is my hopper sponge that I call it. And that will smooth the ink around and migrate the ink around so you get the highlights and the shadows like this. Now, the other thing is that the highlights in this type of process are very hard to do if you don't get enough exposure on it. You have to kill the highlights in your silver print, take them down to about a 2 zones lower than you think, because the ink won't stick to it. But what I found is that the drier the paper gets, the easier the ink sticks to the highlights. And so as you're working the print and putting the ink on, and it starts to get harder and harder to put on because the paper is starting to dry out, it actually gets easier to put the ink onto the highlights then. And so that's kind of the approach that I take on this, is that I think about, when am I going to smooth the ink out? How wet does the paper want to be? And then when am I going to try to get in this case, the yellow onto the highlight areas of the print here? So,
Dan, do you pre-soak the paper before you start?
Yes.
You do. How long is that for?
Anywhere from about 5 to maybe 8 minutes.
Right. Okay.
So
Do you use tepid water?
yeah. And I don't worry too much about the temperature of it. You know, if it's like ambient temperature, it works. That's what I do it at. So I know some of the books, the old-fashioned books, will say, well, you soak it the first time at 75, and then the second time at 78, and the third time at 79. I don't do that's too much. My thermometers aren't that accurate anyway. So I've learned that.
You don't need to really swell it, do you? Or did you?
There's a lot of relief. The thing about this is that the coating is so thick when you use the liquid emulsion like this. After you soak your paper, it's like looking at a carbon print, to tell you the truth. The relief is so much different between the highlights and the shadows. That you see the ridges all over the paper when you're ready to coat the ink on it. It's really kind of interesting to do that.
So you've not heated the water to make it swell?
No, you don't have to.
Gosh.
You don't have to. And I see people talking about soaking Ilford multigrade paper at 90 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes or an hour or something like that. Well,
wow.
I soak it for 6 or 7 minutes, and I think that's longer than I need to, with the liquid emulsion, with the foam and stuff. So
yeah, I've been finding the same thing with the David Lewis paper. I've been cutting back on my soaking time because the highlights completely repel. If I soak it too long, and it's overly contrasty.
So I wanted to show you guys this thing, because it's something very different than what you guys are used to seeing and doing. So
when you do the first inking, do you ink black all over, or did you say you only did the right side and the left?
No, I inked black all over, with the exception of where the purple and the red and the orange is. I left that open. But I found that when you put some black down first and then put color on top of it, it makes the colors richer looking. than just the color by itself. I mean, the alternatives, you take the color and add a little bit of black to it. But I kind of like the depth that you get in the colors when you do it this way. So almost every one I do, I put a black base down first now. Yeah, as a starting point.
Yeah, I think this is really cool. I mean, the gradation from the orange to the purple to the black.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah,
so what I did on this is I used my little finger sponge to put different stripes of the different colors in, and then I used the big sponge to just go over the whole thing and just feather everything out, and it worked just fine.
So what are the inks then, Dan? Are they the traditional inks, or are they just basically oil based?
No, they're inks. I use the yellow that I have here is Graphic Chemical Ink Company. The black is too. The red that I used is from Hanco. I like the Hanco inks. I don't know if you guys can get them over in Europe or not. Canfield makes some good inks too. I use those a lot. So those work well. I think it's Canfield actually sells ink in tubes too. The trouble is it's a lot thinner than the cans, and you gotta stiffen it down a lot. You gotta add a lot of magnesium carbonate to it to get it stiff enough to work in this process. So it comes out of the tube just like oil paint does, but it is lithographer's ink. I've never tried just normal oil paint. When Emil Schilt put his first book out, he said sometimes oil paint works and sometimes it doesn't. So I just never tried it. I've got enough of different colors of the cans of ink to mix almost any color that I need or want. So
you said that with this FOMA emulsion that you need really hard inks.
Yeah, you have to stiffen it. I'll take and spread a little bit of ink out on the tile, and then I'll start adding magnesium carbonate to it. Odd says he uses chalk to stiffen the ink, which I think is probably a very similar product. Almost, maybe it's the same thing. But he does the liquid emulsion too. He's been doing it for quite a while, and he's very good at it too. And you just add more and more and more until the ink gets stiff enough, and it's really just experience that tells you when it's stiff enough to use. And when I do my little workshops here, I tell the people, keep putting the magnesium carbonate in until you think it's stiff enough, and then you still probably need to add a little more. So
and I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the talk. I was something else happened, but you might have already covered this. But do you not use brushes because the brushes are too fierce?
Yes, that's correct.
That's the reason. It tears it.
The emulsion, as thick as it is and as soft as it is, I worry about the brushes damaging the emulsion.
Right.
And I've tried doing little touch-ups with brushes before, and it kind of penetrates and peels up the emulsion sometimes. And I don't want, once that starts happening, there's not much you can do about it. So I only use the sponges now. So
so when you're applying your first coat, you don't use a roller. You're actually hand dabbing the ink in for that first coat.
That's right. Now Michael Carter uses a roller in ink for his initial bromoils, so he takes a little bit different approach to it. But his images are different than mine, because he's doing a small bromoil and then he's taking a photograph of it. I can't even believe he does this. He takes a photograph of it, and then he takes a canvas, sprays more emulsion on the canvas, and then projects the photo of his little bromoil onto the big canvas. It must take him months to do each of these images that he does. He's not as keen on the gradation and tones and the detailing and stuff in his original bromoil as I am, because his process is so different. Is different than anybody's. So it's really interesting looking at his photos that he has of his images. So
that guy's doing some next level stuff there.
Yeah. I don't have enough years left in my life to get into that kind of stuff, I don't think.
Well, cool. So And then is there anything that you want to share around the actual your coding process, since that's kind of a foreign concept for a lot of us?
You know, it's I learned by the only resource I had was Emil's book, because there are no other books out on this stuff. There's a couple of books out there about how to deal with liquid emulsion and making prints from liquid emulsion, but not from making bromoils of them. Denise Ross's book is really good for learning about liquid emulsion and making it from scratch. I've tried that myself. I found that the process of making the liquid emulsion from scratch is a little too fussy for me. It's time consuming, and you have much more temperature control issues you have to deal with, and making sure that everything is being stirred continuously and stuff. And I didn't have as good a result on the actual bromoils. I made good silver prints, but I think this is just my suspicion. I think that FOMA may have more gelatin in their formula than these formulas I tried making liquid emulsion from scratch, which is maybe why the FOMA works really well for this process. Because Emil said the same thing in his book. He said this was the easiest process he's ever found for trying to do these types of bromoils, is using the FOMA emulsion. Now, Rolly works well too. The Rolly emulsion works good too. Liquid Light doesn't. Don't even buy Liquid Light if you want to try this stuff. So, but it is a kind of a frustrating process when you're starting out, because it's a twofold process. You have to learn how to make the right silver print, and then you have to learn how to bleach and tan, and then you have to learn how the inking process goes. So,
and you don't need ultraviolet light, Dan, do you?
Pardon me?
You don't need to expose with ultraviolet light either.
No. And the FOMA emulsion actually is pretty fast. It gives you a contrast grade of about 2.5 to 3. So it's not a low contrast emulsion. It's a higher contrast. Liquid Light is a low contrast, but FOMA and Rolly are pretty good. So the trouble I have is that some of my negatives are too high of a contrast, and I have to do a lot of dodging and burning, or I have to accept that there's going to be some areas that the shadows are blocked up, or the highlights are burned out. So
is the FOMA red light safe?
Yes,
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like working with normal black and white paper. The only thing about the FOMA is you have to keep it in the refrigerator until you're ready to use it, and then you have to heat it up to about 120 degrees, 115 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit to cook the paper with it. So I bought a water bath unit on eBay about 3 years ago, and it works great for heating up the emulsion. The sad thing is that when I bought it 3 or 4 years ago, even longer than that, I think I paid $35 for it on the internet on Amazon Prime. The same unit now, because of COVID and inflation and everything, is now about $100. So it's tripled in cost from what it used to be. And
yeah, I bought like a little sous vide stick to just put in a bucket of water and be able to heat the water up to the right temperature.
Yeah, Denise Ross in her book talks a lot about how to heat water up for your liquid emulsion to coat the paper and stuff. But the trouble with it is that you're having to heat the water up, probably the emulsion up, probably warmer or hotter than the water is that comes out of your faucet, unless you've got your water heater temperature turned way up. And so you're going to need to have, when I first started doing it, before I had the water bath, I heat a bunch of water up on the stove in a pan, and it was pretty hot stuff that I was working with, and it works okay, but you have to keep putting it in the container where you're soaking your emulsion to keep it hot enough. So,
Dan, I use a microwave all the time.
Yeah.
With my gelatin, it's obviously solid when I spread it, and I find that if my gelatin is at room temperature and it's pretty rigid, then I do a minute in the microwave, which takes it to about 120. And then when I want to get the exact temperature, I give it about another 30 seconds to get it to about 130, 140 max. And that really makes it perfect for spreading. And so it doesn't lose its temperature because it takes me only probably a minute to spread it. So I think, well, couldn't you just use a microwave instead? As long as you're monitoring how many seconds you give.
Yeah, you
solution.
could. You could,
You're
but
not messing with water baths.
yeah, the foam of liquid emulsion does start to set up as it starts to cool pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so, like when I coat the paper, you cannot, because I use a glass rod when I coat it. You can't coat it. You can't go over it a second time if you think you screwed up the first time, because by the time you try it your second time, it started to set up already. So
how much stock solution do you have when you're coating? So
I usually, an 11 by 14 sheet of paper takes about 50 to 55 milliliters of emulsion.
Wow.
Well, if you were doing carbon printing, it'd be 3 times that much.
Interesting.
I got a friend of mine who does carbon printing, and he's talking about using 130 milliliters or something like that. But
do you add any photo flow to it?
no.
No. Okay.
No, I've heard about some people who do that, but I'm not sure what kind of benefit that would have for me.
Yeah.
The one thing I do want to try is Michael gave everybody that the plans for the Maori rod, the Maori blade.
Yeah.
And I want to build one myself and try to do that. There it is, right there.
Yep. Yeah, a friend of mine printed it out. Unfortunately, I don't know what the specs were in that file, but the opening here is 8.5 inches wide, which makes for an awkward size. So I was going to talk to her to find out, the friend of mine who printed this out, if she can manipulate the file.
8.5
a little bit.
8.5 is perfect if you want to do contact prints, or with an 8 by 10 neg. So yeah, no, I'm looking. Maybe that's where that comes from. I don't know. So.
But yeah, you can barely see, I mean, you probably can't even see it in the video here, but there's just a 2 millimeter lip right there, and that's where the emulsion kind of comes out. So I haven't tried it yet, but
yeah, but what Michael does is he uses a glass rod and the Maori rod, or the Maori. So he holds the glass rod, which has the Mylar tape on the 2 ends, at the very end of the Maori blade, and just holds it and then just slides it all across. So the glass rod determines the thickness of the emulsion. The Maori blade is just a little bit taller than that. So it just cleans the emulsion, so the emulsion doesn't seep out towards the edges of the paper. Like, that's a problem that I have. So
when you're coating, are you doing one coat of FOMA or multiple coats?
When you do a brush coating, you have to do 2 coats. If you're using a glass rod, you only have to do 1. Because the brush coating goes on quite a bit thinner, unless you're not very good at brush coating. So
and you don't do brush coating at all anymore?
I do a little bit here and there. I do it in my workshops to demonstrate it, so people can see that, because somebody who's just starting out are not going to have probably the coating rod, and they don't necessarily want to spend the money up front until they decide if they want to really pursue this further. The glass rod coating is a little more complicated, but it gives you almost flawless coats every single time. So the coating goes down and it's like as smooth as glass. So the consistency is there.
And so the downside of using a brush is that just the coat is inconsistent.
Well, you have to worry about brush strokes. You have to get your technique figured out to eliminate brush strokes, unless you want to see brush strokes. So, and you have to figure out what's the right kind of brush to use. I have a brush I got from, I think, Bostic and Sullivan a few years back, an inexpensive one that was designed for platinum and palladium, but I also use it for brush coating with the liquid emulsion. And the trick for brush coating is, if you guys ever want to try this, is you get the emulsion on the paper and spread it out real fast, and then you do 4 series of strokes with the brush. You go like vertically all the way across the paper, and then you go horizontally all the way across, and you use less pressure the second time. And then the third time you go bottom to top, less pressure, and the fourth one is is the other direction across. And by the time you're to the fourth one, it's just the weight of the brush that is on the paper. And you use less pressure each time, and it eliminates almost all the brush strokes that show up. So if you just went in and just kind of brushed your emulsion all over the paper, you're going to have brush strokes all over the place. Because I know, because I did that the way when I first started. So.
Is that because it dries too quickly, Dan?
No, it's because you're not spreading it out thin enough and even enough.
Right.
Some people talk about using hockey brushes. I don't recommend that at all, because if you guys have used those things before, the fibers come out. And if you get those things into liquid emulsion, they're there to stay. And they always end up showing up in the white areas and the highlights of your print. The funny thing about those things is that they disappear when you bleach and tan your image, and then they show back up again after the print is dry and you start inking it. So
that sucks. And
they always show up in the worst spot.
Did you make your glass rod yourself, or have you bought?
I have a couple of puddle pushers I bought from Bostic and Sullivan. You don't need to have the handle on it like a puddle pusher does. For the 16 by 20s, I got online on Amazon Prime and found a supplier that has laboratory glassware for science experiments and stuff. And I bought a couple of pieces of glass tubing that are about like 19 inches long, and they were only like $6 or $7 a piece. And I wrapped the Mylar on the two ends, and I just hold the two ends and just pull it across the paper. You don't need a handle on it if you're careful, but you could glue any kind of handle on the rod if you wanted to. But
So
the puddle pushers are expensive. So from Bostic and Sullivan or somebody like that, they're like $35 or $40 for the small ones now. So
when you pour the emulsion, do you pour all 50 or 60 mil in one strip and then pull the lot, or do you can't really, you have to do it in one pull, don't you?
One pull. You pour all of the emulsion out on the paper very carefully, and then you just have the coating rod at the end of the paper, and you just pull it all the way across, and you just pull the emulsion right off the edge of the paper. So you're actually wasting some. You can try to save it, but if you don't get it done right, you're going to have gaps in where the emulsion kind of runs out on one side, and then it really kind of, if you actually look at this in the very upper right corner of the print here, there's that kind of light gray spot up there. That was an area where the emulsion didn't get coated on the if you go up, pan up a little bit, right there,
that white spot up there.
Yeah, that light gray spot. The emulsion didn't get on the paper right there because I didn't get it poured out on the paper really well enough. So I've got to go back and kind of patch that up with some dry coating on that little spot there. So,
I mean, the good thing is that I never noticed that. It just blends in as a feature of the.
I know, but there's one person who sees it every time he looks at this print. You know how it is.
Yeah.
And Dan, when you dry it, you presumably has to be completely flat.
No,
so that,
no,
it doesn't.
You cannot dry this flat. You have to hang it up.
Oh, okay.
And that's in the coating process, and it's in the bromoil process as well. Because the trouble is, if you lay it down, the paper curls like crazy when you when it dries. So this paper right here, if I didn't support it anyway, it would come out dried like that. Okay, it curls out. And so what I do is I hang it up vertically, and then I'll take I have a strip of wood on the bottom, and I put a couple of clamps on the corners, so it kind of keeps it straight. And then when it dries, I need the dry mount press as well to flatten it out a little bit better. But that's also helps for super drying as well in between.
So does the foamer slightly flow during the drying process?
You have to keep it level. You might have problems if you don't keep it level. So I'm fortunate in my darkroom, my coating area, I've got a piece of granite I got from a tile contractor that I use to coat the paper on. And then I've got a table work surface in my darkroom as well that's dead level as well. So I'll coat a piece of paper and then move the glass over to that other table, and I can do about three pieces of paper. Takes me about 8 or 9 minutes per sheet of paper to coat it. By the time I get 3 of them done, the first one is ready to be able to hang up and dry.
Right. Okay.
You have to let it sit for about a half an hour or more.
Nice.
So it's really it's an easy assembly line process that I've kind of got worked out here. Now,
when you coat paper, how many sheets do you usually knock out in a session?
I'll usually pull about, I've got a 600 milliliter beaker, and I'll pull the emulsion out of the canister and fill it up to about the 400 milliliter line, 450 or so. And so as it melts, that gives me down to about 300 to 350 milliliters. So I can do about 6 sheets of paper with that at 50 to 55 milliliters per sheet. So as long as you kind of get it worked out as how much volume you need per sheet of paper, it's really not hard to figure out what to do. The one thing they don't recommend is taking the heated emulsion and then put it back in the fridge.
Right.
Because if you do that too many times, they say it'll start to affect the contrast range in the emulsion.
How long can you store your sensitized paper?
I have had it for up to a couple of months. I just actually did some the other day that I had sitting in the darkroom for a couple of months. You don't have to use it right away. And I've got some bleached and tanned images out there that have been out there for a couple of months as well. They should eke up just fine. So
yeah.
And
the one thing that I have an advantage here, I guess if you want to call it that, because Dave Simons has responded to this, is that I live in the desert, and so the paper dries out overnight. I'll soak it one day and ink or coat, and then the next day it's completely dry. And he says where he lives, the humidity is so high there that sometimes the paper won't dry out for 2 weeks.
Oh wow! The downside to our arid climate is that you got to constantly re-soak the paper.
Yeah, but that's not a big problem. You know, I don't make the soaking process a big scientific process or anything like that. I just run some water in the tray and throw it in there for a few minutes, and then I'm done. So
nice. And I see the James had a chance to join us. Man, I'm gonna butcher your name. Is it Turge? Is that how it's pronounced? Just want to see if any of y'all had any questions that you wanted to ask. Okay.
I think they're muted.
Yeah.
So Richard, let me ask you a couple of questions, okay? Because you do oil prints, okay?
Yeah.
So James Michelson is trying to learn how to do oil printing, and he gave me a couple of sheets of paper with gel coating on it.
Yeah.
And I was going to mix up some dichromate and coat it and see how they would turn out. I think they are single coated with gelatin. You said how many coats of gelatin do you put on?
Just one.
Just one?
One
Okay.
coat, yeah.
I'll have to see how well it works. So
what I do is basically use the same paper you use. I can use Arches, but I just find that the bocking for paper that I get over here in the UK far more robust, no problems with white spots or air bubbles.
Yeah, I don't think we can get that over here in the US.
Well, the Hahnemühle is again pretty much the same quality.
Yeah, I use that too. The Hahnemühle I found is a little softer paper than the Arches.
Yeah.
And I have to be careful when I'm working with wet paper that I don't like tear the corners off. That happened to me one time.
What I find most important is that I soak it in room temperature water for 5 minutes, and then I scald it with boiling water. And I find that takes all the air out of the paper and prevents any bubbles coming through when I've gelled it.
Have you ever had bubbles problems with bubbles? Because I've had it a couple of times with the foam.
Well, I don't. I did with. I had problems with more the Arches Platine, but whether that was a bad batch of paper, I'm not sure. But I find that the scalding for 30 seconds really eliminates most of the problems that I've had in the past.
I was guessing that the few times I've had that problem, it may have been before I coated the paper. I wasn't handling it very well and may have had some oil on my fingers or something like that, and got it on the paper before I coated it. And because I had one that I was it was in the fixer, and all of a sudden this bubble starts forming, and the bubble got up to about 3/4 of an inch or so. It was huge. There's nothing you can do about it except throw the print away when that happens. So.
And Richard, do you have to treat the paper with any chemicals before you start?
No, none.
It's not like salt printing where they have to try and get rid of the carbon dioxide, or they have to get rid of the carbon dioxide that comes off the calcium carbonate in the paper.
I wonder whether my scalding helps that, but
yeah, might do. Yeah,
I was always taught to scald the paper, and that really eliminates any problems.
Yeah.
I immediately dab the paper dry with paper towels, and this is when I said before that I microwave my gelatin. So I usually make up about 600 ml of stock gelatin, which is 10% solution. And when I start to use it, it's obviously solid, so it's stuck in the jar and it's got to be melted. And I then 1 minute microwave it at full power, and then it's sort of pretty loose. And then that takes it to about 100 degrees, perhaps a little bit more. And then when I'm ready to pour onto the damp paper, I just add another 30 seconds or 1 minute in the microwave, and that's somewhere between 120 and 140 max is a maneuverable temperature for spreading. And all I do is make sure I've just got a little homemade table. It's a wooden table that's completely flat. Check it with spirit level, and it's metal sheet on top. So once I've scalded it, just squeegee it once or twice with rubber squeegee, dab most of the water off after the scalding, and then for about an A3 size piece of paper, I use about 65 ml of gelatin, and so that'll be at the perfect temperature of about 130. Pour it on, and I did originally use a magnetic surround, so a magnetic sheet with a big hole cut in for the size of the, if you like, the print that I wanted.
Yeah.
But I find now I don't even use that. I just make sure my paper is completely flat, and I get 65 ml gelatin, pour it on, and it just spreads itself. I hardly need to do any, like, I don't brush, but I comb the edges slightly. And so that probably gives me a much bigger picture area than I need. So if there are any slight thinner areas of gelatin at the edge, it's only for about 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch around the borders. And that quantity of gelatin is, if you like, the perfect quantity for my prints that I do.
Yeah. And I'm using 250 Bloom gel.
Yep, 250. It's called Tongue Master.
Right.
Beef. It's catering gelatin, 250 Bloom. They say grade A. I don't know what that means, but it's been absolutely brilliant. Really has.
Now, when you this is James. When you are worming your gelatin, do you mix alcohol into it for any small air bubbles?
Yes, I think when I make up 600 ml, it's I think 30 mils of isopropyl alcohol.
Okay.
And I think that I'm not really sure what that does, but it seems to either quicken the setting of the gelatin once it's poured.
I think it stops air bubbles forming, doesn't it?
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know when I'm mixing my gelatin powder, putting a little bit of that in, it does actually make the bubbles run away, so to speak.
Yeah.
So Richard, actually, since we have a lot of questions around your process, would love to have you share one of your images next month if you're willing to
Okay.
be our presenter for next month. I think that would be awesome.
Right.
Be careful for sounding like an expert.
My process is so simple, it's ridiculous.
That's great. Well, because also we haven't covered anything non-Bromoil yet. These are all been Bromoil. So to see more about your process, if you're willing to share that with us.
I'll see what I can do. Yeah.
Cool. And then any other questions pertaining to Dan's image? Either capture. One thing I meant to ask, bleaching and tanning. What are you doing there, Dan?
You know, last time James was here, we tried something different. This was about a month or more ago. We mixed up the bleaching compound and the tanning compound separate, and we did it and did the bleaching first and then the tanning second. And I understand why they call it the tanning process now, because when you have the dichromate in with the bleaching chemicals, the outcome of the bleaching process, the image is kind of a greenish gray, ghost image. But when we did the tanning separate, it's a tan colored image actually. That's a different color. It didn't end up inking any easier or harder either way. But it was interesting to do that because one of the problems I was having was some of my bleaching times were getting too long. And I was worried about over tanning them. And so we tried it separately like this, and then also found that I wasn't flipping the prints enough in the bleaching process, and they weren't bleaching fast enough. That was one of the reasons. So
when you say too long, how long was too long?
40 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that gets really boring when that happens.
Yeah, it does. So standard bleaching with the FOMA is about how bleaching and tanning, how long does it normally take?
Well, I found that if I flip the prints a lot, I can get if there's not too many, if I don't overexpose it and get too many oversaturated blacks, I can bleach it in about 8 minutes or so. And then I'll leave it in for a couple of minutes more for the tanning process. So, and that's what I want. I don't like to bleach for 40 minutes. That's no fun. So,
and what happens when you over tan? Does the
I don't know. I've been wondering that myself.
It comes out real muddy. It just tanned all over, and all your whites are tanned also, and you can't lift the ink off of the highlights.
Oh, so the highlights end up taking too much ink?
Yeah, your blacks are what tan first, and then your midtones, it progresses through your midtones and into your highlights, depending on how long you tan it. You have a lot of whites, and you have, real subtle shades of grays and maybe a couple of lines of blacks. You want to tan it for a lot longer just to get that the highlight. I mean, just get the shadows and midtones bleached. Tanned. But if you go too long, it just tans the whole thing. And when you put the ink down, you can't transfer the ink around. It just stays and it gets muddy. If you don't tan long enough, then you get a lot of really white areas that you can't get anything into.
Interesting, because that's a common problem that I have. So maybe I should increase my bleach / tanning time.
No, your first problem is that your highlights are too light to begin with.
Okay.
I would address that first.
Yeah, they need to have some exposure.
You got to have some tone
harden
in
it a little bit, so you need to tan it, enough to do that. Sometimes if you do a couple test strips first, step wedges, you can get it down, pretty good.
So this brings up another question that I've had, which is how much do you rely when doing Bromoil? How much do you rely on dodging and burning and getting the original silver gelatin print to a certain level of perfection before bleaching, or do you rely more on the inking process to bring the shadows and the highlights and dial that in?
Both.
You have to do both.
You need to have a really good negative to begin with, which is why I've gone to trying to make digital negatives, because there's, I always have a lot of bleaching, and I have a lot of dodging and burning that I need to do on my 4x5s or my 8x10s, just because of the scene itself. It's not, I'm exposing it as well as I can, but the scene itself, like Dan's picture here, way up at the top of the canyon, it's really blown out, and then down in the shadows, it's blocked up. And so, that's just the exposure. I can play with it in the developing stage, but there's still issues with it. So I'm going to the digital negatives so I can, make that, a lot better. Then just do a test strip, a 21 step wedge test strip, and you can get your blacks and your whites, and you can get everything where you really need it, and then put that in as a preset in your digital negative.
Nice. Yeah, one of the things I really like about this image, Dan, is the latitude of from the darks to the lights, but the fact that we got this little bit of a highlight pop on the rock over here is really cool.
It wasn't there when I put the ink on. It requires the dark shadows like this with detail in it requires a lot of working with the sponge.
And that's where I found the sponges for me. What really works, I don't apply with sponges, but I'll do my application with a brush. I'll kind of do one or two passes, but then where it starts to block up, I'll put the print in water, and I take a sponge, and the sponge actually helps kind of like remove some of that ink where it's been blocked up. But yeah. And then as far as like mixing colors, do you find that are you just mixing colors on each individual print, or do you have like go-to mixtures that you use with the colors?
I have probably about 8 different colors of ink to work with, 8 or 9. But frequently I'll end up mixing colors to get a certain shade that I want to have. The problem with inking colors that I found is that when you're trying to mix the ink on the tile, you try to get the purple, and you mix blue and red to try to get purple. And the ink shows so much darker on the tile than on the paper because it's transparent to a certain extent on the paper. So trying to come up with an exact shade, I found, is really hard. I'm not good enough at that yet. So one thing I found is that if you try to make colors look real, and try to take a landscape and make the colors look exactly the way they would in real life, you're going to have a real problem, and you're probably going to have a print that doesn't look very good either. Right. And what I have found is that with working the colors is don't try to do something that tries to look realistic. Now, in this case, the colors are so extreme, and I knew that going into this, the colors are so extreme in the canyon here that it's not something that is hard to do. But I have tried taking landscapes before and try to mix the colors up so that the greens are the right green and the blues are the right blue, and it doesn't come off very well. So
gotcha. Nice. Well, thanks for sharing this one, man. This is great. It gives us a chance to see some like incorporation of color. We get a chance to learn a little bit more about coding, which is great. So this is a great example, man.
Yeah, most of the examples you see on color with liquid emulsion is just like, somebody uses red instead of brown or black or something like that. And so I thought this was a good example to show a lot of different things from a color standpoint. So
awesome. So yeah, anybody have any other questions before we wrap this up?
James, I'm glad you made it.
Yeah, it was a real. I'm not digital, and so I had to do a lot of iterations. I had to join Zoom, and that was a problem. And
Are
I
you on
tried
your
to do it
phone?
on my phone, and my phone all of a sudden, Verizon, thank you very much. I don't have a web page, so yeah, I'm not digital at all. It's stuff.
Are you on your phone right now or on your
No, I
computer?
finally got it on my Mac here.
Oh, good.
And
Oh,
Mac is a
nice.
completely different platform for me too. So, but I couldn't do it on my PC. I don't know.
So now that we got you figured out how to do it on your computer now, then you can share one of your prints one time.
I haven't figured that how to do a screenshot yet. So
Well, you don't have to. All you got to do is send an image to Austin. He'll put it up.
I'll have to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sharing Dan's image right now on my computer. So
Can you show videos, Austin, as well?
say that again, Richard?
Videos way over my head.
Can you show a little video clip?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you have video of your process, that would be amazing. And we can share that. I'm pretty tech savvy. This is my job, is working in production. So yeah, I can pretty much do anything.
So I have an announcement though. My book is getting closer to being finished. So I think it's going to be maybe another 2 or 3 weeks at the publisher's end. They just sent me their first copy of the inside of the book. They're still working on the cover and stuff, but I need to go through and make any editing comments, but it's getting closer.
Congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. I'll be over out next week.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, next Friday.
Thursday.
Or Thursday. Yeah, next Thursday.
And so it's specifically on creating Bromoil from FOMA.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I'm hoping I can find a way to get out there to do the workshop with you, man.
Sure.
Are you still planning on trying to come out to Zion?
I'll be there.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, as we get closer to that, we'll coordinate a meetup.
Sure.
Cool. And Richard, I'll reach back out to you offline to see if we can set up something for next week for next month.
Sounds good.
When you get out to Zion, get ready for that in May and June. Get ready for no-see-ums and crowds, lots of crowds.
So I just saw Turge's comment there. Can we get Emil to be in the group here? I don't know how active he is anymore. He doesn't seem to be posting on the large format forum anymore. So
I'm connected with him, so we've shot messages back and forth in the past, and so I can ask him if that's something he would be interested in.
He might not even know about our group here. So
yeah, I don't think he does.
If you get in contact with him, tell him that we've got a couple of members here who learned from his book. I think Odd may have taken a workshop from him. Because he does it in his style.
Workshops a while back, and it sounded like that was not something that he's doing anymore, really.
I don't think so. So,
Turge, I have a question for you. Do you use any hardener in your gel on your papers? Turge?
He might not have a microphone.
Oh, okay.
nope.
Oh,
He
it
says
says
no.
he does not based on it from email.
Okay.
But Michael Carter actually does use hardener a little bit. So
yeah, some people have said yes. My friend up in British Columbia, Frantisek, he uses it, and his work is really good. Frantisek Strohal,
yeah,
British Columbia, and he actually has a little video by the British Columbia National Broadcast System for it, and it's pretty interesting. But he does some amazing color work, absolutely amazing.
Hold on a sec, I want to write down that name.
Yeah, and James, correct me if I'm wrong. He started out doing bromoils, but now
that's where I got all my original paper was from him.
Yeah,
because he does oil prints now. It's Frantisek, Frantisek. T-I-C-E-K, I think.
Yeah.
Strohal, Stroouhal.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold on, damn it, all my
And he does his prints commercially. He makes a living at it.
all my pens dried up on me here.
But he does big prints.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
I'll see that.
I traded him some Bromoils for one of his prints. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, James, would you mind or Dan, would one of y'all mind just texting me or sending me a message with the spelling of his name?
Yep, I will.
Get a pen that will work right now.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Grab is dry. Once again, living in the desert.
Where do you live?
I'm in Denver.
The high
Oh,
desert.
Denver. Okay. Not only desert, but high.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm actually going to do some photography today with the Victorian Society
Ooh,
on a meetup. So I thought I might be some interesting Bromoil-esque scenes with a Victorian home and some of the people in Victorian dress. So we'll
oh, nice. Yeah.
see how that comes together.
I wanted to do that out in Bodie, California, ghost town. They get friends of Bodie get together and they dress up all in the late 1800s garb and everything, and they do the tours and all that stuff, and it's really cool.
Nice. Well, yeah, we'll stay in touch. I look forward to meeting both of y'all on in May, and we'll share our pictures and make all of our UK friends jealous of the amazing landscapes we have here.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a great weekend. And yeah, I'll cut this down a little bit and get it uploaded to share with the rest of the group.
Sweet. Sounds good.
All right. Awesome. Have a good one, y'all.
Okay.
Hey, guys.
Good.
All right. Bye.